So today's panel is on overcoming compliance barriers to open source collaboration infrastructure. So what does that mean? All right, how many of you work at a bank today? Okay, and how many of you are allowed to use your Gmail address to join a Google group or commit some code to GitHub? All right, so you know what compliance barriers are to infrastructure. Whoops. Whoops, did we lose signal here? There we go. All right. So we're just going to set the stage a little bit. We're going to try and do a panel. Jamie from GitHub and Mao from FINOS are here with me today, and I'm going to try not to talk too much. We're going to talk a little bit about what the barriers are, but I think a lot of you are very familiar with them. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on in FINOS that are helping to reduce those barriers, and give a plug for some up-and-coming projects that are working here as well, and go through all this. So we're going to try and leave a lot of time for Q&A. So just there. So we all know that the financial services is very highly regulated. You're probably the most highly regulated industry, maybe outside of healthcare, that I get to work in. And that unregulated banking is not a good thing. So we're not going to get rid of that regulation anytime soon. And we've all seen the huge issues when data is not secured and data is lost and data is hacked, or we do this. So a lot of our time and energy and the reasons for those compliance barriers are just to make sure that we don't have any data loss or lose any intellectual property, or that's really one of the highest priorities in all of the banking and fintech companies that we work with. And basically because of that, and one of the reasons that you don't get access to Gmail or get to use your iPhone or whatever it is in-house is because there's all this surveillance that's going on. And the surveillance in this sense is, it's not a secret that you're being surveilled if you work at a bank or anything. Everything you do is logged and audited and tracked. And that brings another whole set of issues for you to have to deal with when you come to an open source community and want to collaborate, because we were just having a great conversation about IRC and Slack and all of the other tools that all of us who work in open source at Red Hat and other places have the opportunity to use without any regulation. And we look like the kids in the candy store to you guys. That candy store can be very bad too, because at Red Hat, for example, we don't say which Slack channel or which instant messaging tool you have to use. So Handson, therefore, just for Red Hatting alone, I have WhatsApp, I have Rocket Chat, I have IRC, I have Slack, and probably 5 other things, plus 5 other things to do webinars in, because everybody has a favorite toy, right? So there's a degree of where this gets to be a bad thing. But one of the things that we're trying to do here with FINOS is we do a lot of surveys, a lot of talking with and focus groups with people from the banking and finance industry to find out and uncover the different tools that you can use, and the ones that you can't use, we're looking for the one, how we can help you with that by creating chat bots or things that are creating those audit logs and the things that you need. So that's really a big piece of what we're trying to bring to you from the FINOS perspective. So the other thing is, besides chatting with each other, is development environments. So a lot of you are working in environments where you cannot just download an image from Docker Hub and use it. How many of you have downloaded an image from Docker Hub with an application on it and been allowed to deploy it on a server behind your firewall? Yeah, so you have no firewall. Okay, well, he's got a different problem. And so, yeah, he's got a different problem. He's got a different problem. But and it's not like when you go to China, there are things that are blocked when you go there. Try and use Facebook or one of the other tools. But go inside of any bank, there's a lot of other things that are blocked as well. Whole domain names of things that you'd want to be able to use. And the caveat that everyone has is if you violate those things, if you try, like is the Waltz guy in the room? Yes, the Waltz guy's in there. Trying to work on an open source project at an unnamed bank. And having to, go around and do all that work, use probably with a Gmail account or whatever, outside of the working hours is the one way you end up contributing to an open source project until it's so hot and cool that they cave and allow you to work on it internally. But it takes a lot of work to get that stuff. So very rarely do we see a banking and finance company that has access to a full open source development platform. And so what we've been doing here with FINOS is there's an open developer platform. Everybody have heard of ODP? If you haven't, then Gab hasn't been talking loud enough, but we will talk about it a little bit more. Because really what we're our goal is to figure out how to lower those barriers. And in some things, like for me on a daily basis, I'm logging into GitHub. I'm logging into OpenShift, which is our developer platform. It's built on Kubernetes, or Atlassian to come and comment on something that Mao has written and told me that I have to update on the FINOS site. Or I'm on a Slack channel. These are like the ubiquitous things that you'll see me on and you can find me in on any given day because I can. But there are ways, and if you look at the one for OpenShift, this social authentication. Sometimes that's the key that helps you get access to these things. One of those things, maybe it's the Google one, maybe it's linked, there's something that you can do. So we're looking at trying to figure out what we can do to lower those barriers to participation so that you don't get fired for working on your sidecar, or, your, what is it called, side hustle at work, and try and figure out how to make sure that you are able to this, because I think this whole two-day event here, today and tomorrow, is all about the wonders and the wonderfulness about driving innovation using open source stuff. But if you can't even access the Git repo where the code is, then you've got a problem. I mean, you don't get the benefit of sharing ideas or putting in a pull request. And we don't, as open source developers, get the feedback that we need on our project. So and I think that's really the mandate for FINOS, is to figure out how to lower those barriers specifically for FSIs and FinTech. The other things that we're really trying to proliferate are shared CI/CD pipelines, so that when you do build something, that we can collaborate on making sure that it's continuously integrated and the development processes are using state-of-the-art technologies and sharing the development platform, which is what ODP is. So there's a lot of work still to be done. And so my colleagues and I have been part of the FINOS. When did FINOS start? Okay, so not very long, but we've been all collaborating. Yeah. So this next bit, I think it's Jamie's turn to talk. So I'm going to hand it over to Jamie Jones from GitHub, and he's going to talk about one of the working groups that's focusing on it.
Beautiful, thank you, Diane. As Diane mentioned, I'm Jamie Jones from GitHub, and I run chair of the FinsServ Developer Experience program. So as you've heard today, there's some 10, 12 programs within the foundation today. Everything from voice technology to desktop technology to financial object creation and standardization. Though, as Diane mentioned, there's a lot of tools that go in the background to make these sort of programs and these processes work. Collaboration spaces like Atlassian products, Jira, Confluence, ability to share code like GitHub, and things like OpenShift to actually run these products and projects on. FDX sort of focuses on those processes themselves, making sure that you, banks, organizations can get access to these tools, as well as your requirements for these tools, whether it be access, ports, surveillance, compliant, audit, are all understood not only amongst each other, as well as to the tool vendors themselves. So while I'm from GitHub, we work within the program itself in the working groups with all sorts of vendors. So from GitLab, who's also a member here of the foundation, to either people who are not members of the foundation. Because at the end of the day, you as banks use a lot of tools that aren't necessarily members of the foundation. So it's our goal to sort of streamline all of that process. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the FDX program itself, and then we'll start digging into the working groups to sort of give you an idea for how we're trying to tackle the compliance and regulatory problems that we tend to run into that Diane just so eloquently explained, and then we'll sort of open it up for a Q&A. But sort of as the eye chart says, right, the FDX program is to try to define and describe high productivity end-to-end development environments for not only the FINOS Foundation members, but for regulated industries, for banks, for FinServ, for FinTech in general, right? We do that by 3 specific working groups: developer experience, cloud native, as well as the ODP. And again, we'll get more in touch on all of those here shortly. For the FDX landscape itself, so we see contributions from the outside, both from, what are we showing here? Developers, software vendors, as well as application providers. So truly the programs within the foundation itself, they're bringing their requirements, their questions, their needs, and their concerns into either the developer experience working group or the cloud native working group, depending on the topic. And then we're sort of triaging them, working with outside vendors or internal vendors, as well as bringing those requirements into the open developer platform as a way to sort of realize them in a vehicle for everyone within the foundation to use. Also, at the same time, we see the FINOS Foundation staff themselves bringing requirements in. You know, as Diane mentioned a few minutes ago, Gab, the director, has one-on-ones each month with all of our members and works very closely with a lot of their technical projects. So he's getting information as well of, we need to help access this tool. It would be really great if FINOS could provide access to this API or this sort of data set or this sort of collaboration capability. So they get this information that they can bring into the ODP as well. And finally, we mentioned ODP a lot, and again, Mal will go into it in detail a little bit further. But it really is what we consider to be a prescriptive way to develop open source, not just for the programs within the foundation, but really for developers who have to work in regulated environments that can meet your needs. So it uses common, modern, best-of-breed tooling, as well as the security, workflow, and audit and compliance requirements that we think hit the majority of the use cases. This is not to say that we can't pick a bank off of a shelf and they won't give us 10 different compliance and legal requirements that it does not meet. But overall, as we're talking about what's the 90% use case, the 95% use case, throughout the year, so the ODP actually pre-existed the FINOS Foundation, was one of the legacy pullovers from the Symphony Software Foundation. We found it to be a really good abstraction and tool to help get organizations up and running on open source quickly. So just as a reminder, as we have it 2 days going on, earlier on today, speaking of FDX, with the panel we're doing right now, I gave us talk earlier about security and open source and using these tools for that. There was also a tool conversation at 1:30 about the CLA bot and some of the automation and compliance features built into ODP. Also tomorrow, there are 2 different talks relating to FDX. One of them at 9:40 is talking about how Goldman Sachs does their open source process. And sort of how they get code out into the open, as well as another discussion panel, I think, actually, at 10 a.m., more specifically than going from Goldman Sachs' example to how it goes into the ODP and gets used by the greater community. So from a high-level view of the FDX program itself, a little bit deeper dive into the DX working group. Again, I already sort of gave this overview, but it's trying to get in more of the technical requirements and details that go into organizations using modern software and modern software practices. So it's, again, involved with FINOS members, program participants, because since we're an open source foundation, you don't have to be a member to actually participate in our programs or working groups, as well as anyone throughout the financial service industry. A good example of the sort of things we've been working on lately, we've been working with one large bank who is on their firewall requirements for getting to external tools such as Jira and GitHub, what ports need to be open, and whether we can restrict out certain features to them, because that's what their compliance and legal teams need. We've worked with another group who's looking for how GitHub issues can meet their collaboration and, what's the word I'm thinking of? Compliance requirements. They see GitHub issues as a public representation of their firm, which means it needs to be approved before being released externally. Anyone who's ever worked or contributed to an open source project, you can imagine getting every comment you would make in that project to be approved by your external brand and marketing team isn't something that really scales. So working with them to better understand what their legal requirements are, what the tools the ODP has in place can help to facilitate that, and also giving them some discussions and questions they can ask their own legal and compliance team to maybe not push back, but to dig deeper into what the actual requirement that needs to be solved, and maybe we can solve it in another fashion. Maybe instead of blocking it, we can audit it, or we can give the ability to retract it in a certain time period in case it betrayed what the firm was trying to show. And finally, we've been working with programs within the foundation itself. A good example is FDC3 was looking for ways to share some of the standards, APIs, and tools that they've been developing over the past few months. So they brought their requirement, how can we share this with the greater community, to DX. And DX has worked with them and talked through the options of wikis and static website hosting and everything from Swagger docs to big text files, and sort of working them through those requirements, not only what meets their needs, but what will be accessible to their members and to other banks as well. So we sort of have, we wear many hats within the DX program, really trying to answer any technical questions or access questions any of our members would have. And that, in a nutshell, is DX. Diane?
We're just going to keep walking through this. And so the newest, I think the newest working group is probably this one, the Cloud Native Working Group. How many of you have done any work with the CNCF, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation? You know, some of us have. So we just, out of those focus groups and the things that people have been asking for more information on and more reference architectures and more best practices and white papers on, has been this whole new paradigm of cloud computing. So this is a very, it comes from the CNCF. The definition of this is cloud computing uses an open source software stack to segment applications into microservices, packaging each of them into its own container, and dynamically orchestrating those containers to optimize resource utilization and scale, should say, and scale afterwards. So when we talk about Docker containers or container images and things along that thing, we still have a lot of education to do. There's been a long history getting from the non-virtualized hardware to virtualization, came around 2001. Then there was infrastructure as a service, and Amazon did a wonderful job with that. And then there was something which was near and dear to my heart, platform as a service, and Heroku, I think, came out with the first offering around that. And then sort of in response to Amazon's web service, so the IIS, the open source IIS OpenStack, which is having its conference this week right now in parallel with us in Berlin, came along in 2011. And then this thing called containers got really popular when Docker came out with its ubiquitous standard for containerization. Containers had been around for a long time. How many of you know about LXC containers and things along that nature? But Docker did us a wonderful favor. They made it very popular and very pervasive throughout the developer communities, and which has been a wonderful thing. And then the next thing that came along was Kubernetes. How many of you have heard of Kubernetes? See, my work is done. I can go home now. It's all good. It's all good. And Kubernetes is what the project that I work on, OpenShift and OKD, is built on. And Kubernetes also is not the only piece of that stack. The CNCF has about, I don't know, the last time I counted, there was 15 projects, from Prometheus to Open Tracing to a whole bunch of other ones. They're all tooling for working in this new microservices, containerized, highly orchestrated environment. And we know that all of you are somewhere in this history, somewhere on this vector, going that way, hopefully. And there's a lot of lifting and shifting and a lot of legacy apps there that need help and need some education on. So we've learned a lot, and some of us get to be on the bleeding edge of things because that's just the nature of being at Red Hat and other tech companies. But we have really seen the world move from servers to virtual machines and containers, though I've been having great conversations recently about running OpenShift on bare metal. So it's like, you know, wait a minute, I thought I was over here, but now I'm back here. So there's a lot of leeway here. We've gone from the isolation units being very heavy, the VMs that are still running out there, running Windows workloads or your legacy Windows captive in some VM because you need that app to run. We know that's there, but we're getting to the lighter weight, lower footprint operating systems like CoreOS and others. And we've gone to a more, we call it pets to cattle. So instead of having our favorite application that we loved and nurtured and there, to having lots of those containers running, so if one of them dies, something else springs up to take its place. So we've really changed the way we architect our application and the way that we deploy them. And we've gone to, and I know this sounds like a Red Hat hype or somebody, but we've gone to a much more hybrid model of cloud hosting, where you can run your application. You should be able to run your application if it's containerized and you've properly developed it on any of the cloud providers. And so that is really the end goal here, is not to lock you into any one cloud. You can do that well enough by using their special services and things like that, that you're going to do that fine. But you have the option here of being able to move your workloads either on-prem or to any cloud provider, and that's really the goal of the cloud native architectures. One of the other goals of the cloud native group that we're working on is building out the FINOS service catalog, or some of you might think of it as a marketplace with, and what we'd like to do is take and expose all of the projects and the tooling that are being developed in FINOS, from the voice recognition stuff to the FDX to all of these wonderful things, and have a catalog that you can just deploy and test and build applications on OpenShift, which is what's under the hood at ODP, and deploy them anywhere. And that's really one of our goals. So if you're interested in taking your project and transitioning it to that, this is the working group for you. So our charter, which I wrote like a week ago, so I'm sure it's going to be new. Hot off the press here is really is about creating that the reference architectures, the white papers, talking to you guys in the focus groups about what your use cases are, and then curating and promoting things into a FINOS service catalog. So helping you, if you're working on any of the other 12 or 13 or 15 projects there are now, whatever, but next week it'll be 15. Getting those into containers and available for people to use via, the service catalog inside of ODP. And so what I'm going to pitch for, because this is 2 weeks old, is if you're interested in this, or if you have expertise in this area, or you have a service that you'd like to see learn how to containerize, come work with us, and we'll happily handhold you through the first build of an image, if that's where you're at, or we'll happily give you the podium to talk about what you've done, and so we can learn from your best practices and the lessons that you've learned. So, we're moving very quickly. Brian Ingenito is not here. So in his stead, Mao is going to give the ODP platform working group talk.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So today, I just real quick want to give you an update on what is the mission or the charter of the Open Developer Platform. I hope it's clearer from what Jamie introduced before. What the Open Developer Platform does is to collect requirements, decomposes them, prioritize them, and just bundles them into sprints that are later executed by the FINOS infra team, which is myself plus Nico, another guy. What it doesn't do is to validate these use cases, because this is what the developer experience and the cloud native working group are for. So basically, if you're looking to find a solution to a problem, these are the guys you should talk to. If you know that there is an ongoing activity that is in progress in the Open Developer Platform working group, you are welcome to discuss this with us. You are welcome to actually push for a more, for a quicker resolution, okay, to vote for that. So the team is actually composed right now by Brian Ingenito, the chair, Diane, Jamie, and myself.
Brian represents who?
Sorry?
Brian represents who?
Morgan Stanley, apologies, yes. And we use mainlist, the FDX ODP at finos.org as main communication channel. We meet bi-weekly on Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You're welcome to join our WebEx calls. They are open for listening in. We use the wiki, as we mentioned before, to gather documentation, and we use Jira to manage the backlog. Now, all of this infrastructure is open. So you can go and check what we're doing, if we are solving some of the problems that you are facing. So to get back to some of the things that Jamie mentioned before, these are the activities that we feel like we've already delivered, because again, this is the Open Developer Platform is something that started in 2016. Probably my first activity when I joined FINOS, which used to be called Symphony Software Foundation, in May 2016. So this is something that is going on since a while, right? Before Developer Experience and Cloud Native, we also were the venue where we collected the requirements and did validation, right? So now we're trying to offload a little bit of the task to other working groups. But we identified, if you want, some evolution, if you want, of the ODP roadmap. We feel like we are pretty much on the second stage, in the compliance stage. We started off by basically publishing best practices, right? How do you use branches with GitHub? Which kind of security validations you should be doing, and so on and so forth. Now we're moving more into the development of tools for compliance and validation. We are helping programs within FINOS, specifically one of the latest is FTC3, where we got a lot of activity because the program is almost ready to release standards. So we are supporting the activity of other FINOS programs to make them productive. And in the future, what we really want to see is to see FINOS participants, banks, which are part of of this community, to be able to just manage their activity by themselves without asking for a review, without having to rely on the FINOS team specifically, right? Last but not least, the integrated, let's say, step of the evolution is where I would like to see, like the Open Developer Platform using containerized architectures to build this pipeline, or having a white paper or several white papers produced by the developer experience on how this end-to-end workflow works. So, okay, clicker. Okay, well, that works. Yeah, work around, shut down, restart. So, just a quick slide on who is welcome and who can participate to this working group. If you're a software vendor and you are building tools that help, that could be a good addition to this end-to-end developer pipeline, what Jamie showed before in the Open Developer Platform, you are welcome to join the conversation and to actually share your solution, right? Whether it's going to be shared as a hosted service, whether we deploy it, whether it's a white paper, it's still a lot of value for this industry, right? Or anyone else who is interested in the activities that are in progress within the Open Developer Platform Working Group, you can just listen in. You can join one of our WebEx calls. You can comment the Jira issues. You can drop a comment on Confluence. Still, again, if the issue is still not part of the ODP backlog, probably you want to talk to the Developer Experience or Cloud Native Working Group. So this was just a very high-level overview of the Open Developer Platform. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., room 8 or 9, probably room 9, 10 a.m., we have a working session. So I'm going to go through technical details of this ODP pipeline, specifically imagining that Goldman Sachs sends a pull request to a FINOS hosted project. What does the Open Developer Platform do? What is the value that adds up to this pull request? We're gonna go through this pipeline tomorrow and quite quickly, and then we're gonna open for conversation with the audience, because I understand that banks are in this venue. I mean, Open Source Strategy Forum for us is an extremely important opportunity to meet and to validate what we're building with you, coming from banks. So with that, I'm gonna give it back to you, Diane, for the final remarks. Or we
I
open
think
for...
we open up for questions.
we open, yeah.
The other time, what time does the hands-on workshop start tomorrow?
10 a.m.
The OpenShift one? Okay. Yeah, so the other thing that's happening tomorrow afternoon, if you want some hands-on experience, we brought a bunch of the folks from the OpenShift team, and ODP under the hood has a large component of the CI and the CD is running on OpenShift, so you can get some hands-on experience there too. So did you put more slides? That final remarks. Do I have final remarks? Closing. I guess I do. There. You wrote. See, I didn't write all these slides. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Here. This is Diane's favorite thing to do is hand off the podium.
Fabulousness. Hi, everyone. I'm your impromptu panelist. My name is Leslie Hawthorne. I work at Red Hat on the Open Source and Standards team. And the Open Source Readiness Working Group is a collective effort with FINOS and the rest of the folks who are working on this, including Mr. Jamie Jones, to help FINOS members become ready to implement open source strategies. So this is everything from how do we do code audits to ensure that we are using open source software in compliance with its licensing requirements, to we would like to create an open source review board. What is the process for that? How do we train developers in order to make sure that they will follow the rules regarding open source software? To do we need an open source programs office? And if so, what does that structure look like for us? So we have regular working group calls. If you are working to implement an open source strategy within your organization or would like to share best practices from having done that, we would love for you to join us. And you can get in touch with me or Aaron Williamson to get added to the recurring calls. Thanks, folks.
So, yeah, sure. So, is there any question from the room or anything that anyone from banks want to share? Is this solving you some issues, or would you like to see something else in here? Maurizio. So that's an interesting question. This is something that we have, that I actually phrased as ODP surveilled code management tool. So I think that the surveilled issue on developing code is something that is normally fixed within the firewall, the corporate firewall, rather than being an afterthought, right? Because if you wanna. No, I do. One sec. So I don't have a specific answer to that. I think that it's right now we see that well, Jamie was mentioning before in his previous presentation about a proxy solution. So a proxy that can be installed behind the firewall and takes care of doing the validation and the analysis before having the code published openly, right? So at the same time, within ODP, we do have some validations, but it's based on the code that is already public, right? So I believe that a solution for the financial world, a solid solution, should be based on some sort of proxying mechanism that will allow banks to be sure that if there is any concern with the code that is about to go public, it will be intercepted before going live. But again, this is something where I know that GitHub is working on, and I don't know, maybe Jamie can share some thoughts. Leslie, you had some thoughts as well?
So I just wanted to say that there's two halves to that question. There's the technical implementation solution, and then there's the talking to folks within your organization about changing processes and policies to be less onerous so that your developers are more able to access all the resources Diane called out as part of her day job. And the Open Source Readiness Working Group is absolutely here to help you make that business case if that's going to be helpful to you in your job.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add onto that, and sort of your comment was good in the sense that it asked the question, how can we help banks contribute to open source who can't today? As I think Mal put it very well too when he was describing the relationship between DX and cloud native to ODP, a lot of these groups' goal is to get requirements for these tools. As I mentioned, I've talked to some banks who say, well, we can't contribute to GitHub because we think of it as social media or external communications. Other organizations have said, well, we consider it a code risk or security problem. So even the requirements of why multiple banks and vendors can't contribute is different. So part of what we're just trying to do is, instead of speaking, well, okay, we all can't contribute, let's all get to the real compliance, legal, or policy aspects. If it's policy, we can throw them towards open source readiness. If it's technical, we can take it to the actual vendors that's stopping, whether it's GitHub or Travis or WhiteSource or whatever the other tools out there need to be, including GitLab and everything else. And so I think that's also part of where the thing is trying to pull these requirements. And honestly, my best solution is you can't contribute because you think it's social media. Well, let's talk to these 3 other banks who are available in this focus group who can tell you why they didn't classify it as social media and try to get your legal or your compliance talking to each other. So it's not the foundation helping, it's really the banks helping each other. Thanks.
Did it answer the question? Thanks, Masi. Yes.
Do you guys have any thoughts on reviewing licenses at scale? So the challenge of taking a build and actually looking at all of the dependencies and then wrapping it all up into some sort of scaled assessment by release rather than trying to look at each individual library.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to answer to the non-containerized aspect of the question. I will let Diane answer to the containerized one. We use white source. So you were probably, were you in the room when David Habusha presented the white source package? They gave the 101 security presentation. Well, we teamed up with WhiteSource. WhiteSource gave us a dedicated instance for FINOS to scan our projects. That doesn't mean that all FINOS hosted projects use WhiteSource. We actually set a requirement for released, for giving a released badge to our project to actually generate a bill of material. You can generate it manually, of course, but then WhiteSource will do it continuously on commit. So there are some requirements, right, that the program, the PMC, the governance part of the FINOS program require to projects to comply to. There is definitely improvement, right? So there is improvement in the white source products, in the vendor solutions to be more sensitive to the industry requirements, and there is definitely improvement on our configuration because white source is configured with the policies that FINOS establishes. So the build fails if there is, I cannot find a license on a package. I just fail the build. That's it. If it is uncompatible with the outbound license. For example, GPL is not compatible with Apache 2. Apache 2 is our outbound license across all the projects. We just raise a flag. If there is a security vulnerability and so on and so forth. So we established these policies in white source. What happens in the container world? I think that Diane is more.
It's actually quite similar. We have partners like Black Duck and open source projects like OpenSCAP and that are doing very similar workflows that are built into part of the automation when you build your image and when you deploy it or when you patch it. So it's basically what he described for white source, but a different set of tools and different set of vendors who are capable of doing that on a container and scanning all of the images for everything that's in there and then going back and tracing it. And we've come a long way. Like 8-9 years ago, I worked at a small startup called Active State doing Python language library, and I can remember scanning those repos and looking for what license was in there and in order to package it up. So a lot of automation has come in since those spreadsheets that I built. So suffice to say is that there's a lot of great people at Red Hat and elsewhere that are thinking about it, especially some of the folks at Black Duck as well have done some great, and there's a wonderful open source project called OpenSCAP that you can check out too.
Back to the container question. I mean, Diane mentioned the ODP service catalog, right? So the service catalog is supposed to be the showcase of all the FINOS projects and activities in a containerized format, right? That's where we probably want to set some security, legal, compliance checks, as much as we are doing for code right now, right? Because again, there is importance to scanning the source code as much as there is for scanning binaries and runtimes.
There's lots of different times when you want to be doing this. It's like when you first build the image, we have some tools called source to image that build it. Every time you patch it, every time you deploy it, there's all these built-in checks and balances that are using these tooling now, and it is in play right now in most organizations.
I think we are done with time. Thank you very much. If you have any other question, please grab me or see you tomorrow. Thank you.